Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear brothers and sisters. I had said last week that today's talk would be on the true nature of reality, which it will, but as I considered through the week what exactly is the true nature of reality, it is probably a bit beyond anyone's level to, what I want to say is I'm not going to promise you that what I tell you today is the absolute truth of the true nature of reality. It will be a perspective of the true nature of reality given the data that we have available right now. And tomorrow's talk will be on Islamic psychology, a new paradigm, which is going to be a totally new perspective of what psychology is about and how it can be used in Islam. Because recently there have been articles in the newspaper, and a prominent local psychologist had written a book some time ago talking about the difficulties of the possibility of having an Islamic psychology, and whether even an Islamic psychology, such a thing as an Islamic psychology exists. So I want to I want to show an Islamic psychology tomorrow that answers every single objection to non-Islamic, to non-Islamic psychology, and how it successfully answers everything that Islamic psychology should be, which will also go a little bit into, if there is time, what is the right Islamic way of life in the sense of a psychological life in Islam. But for today's talk on true nature of reality, the more I consider it, the more difficult it is to really say what the true nature of reality is. I mean, there's only one thing that I can really tell you for sure that is the true nature of reality. Once we go beyond that, it gets much more difficult. And we are, of course, told that, and it is true, that we cannot actually know Allah in His essence. So, what do we know about Allah? Because I just want to mention an odd thing here. If anyone knows this ayat from the Quran, which is, I don't know the name of it because I don't know what number 17 is, 1785, and it is, "The spirit concerns only my Lord, the knowledge of which only a little is communicated to you." Now, there are scholars who want to say that, of course, Allah has told us, don't bother to look into my nature because it is unknowable. Okay? So as I tell you the true nature of existence, I'm not going to be telling you what Allah's nature is, because we could hardly disagree with Allah that it is unknowable. But this statement that I just read, it is I think really, this is quite odd. "The spirit concerns only my Lord, the knowledge of which only a little is communicated to you." And then, now I mean I know I'm reading this in English, but if it says the same thing in Arabic that it says in English, I wonder why, right after saying this, I read scholar after scholar who says, therefore, to look into this area the spirit and the spirit world and paradise is forbidden to us, where I don't see it being forbidden to us at all to look into. That what we are told is we'll only know a little bit of it. But when you consider that Allah's knowledge of everything is infinite, the question of what a little bit is in relationship to infinity is a little bit hard to fathom. So I go on the assumption that Allah has left us with the option of learning as much as we can. And in general, my approach, which I haven't specifically mentioned before, but where I'll be coming from when I talk about what is the true nature of our reality, I take the approach that the data of Western science is really good. That in the past it had not been very good. We have reached a quite sophisticated level of acquiring data now in the in what is called Western science. Unfortunately, we don't have that much Islamic science yet. And in Islam, we ignore a lot of that data because we don't separate the data from the interpretation. And as long as you are interpreting good data with a wrong philosophical interpretation, which is essentially materialist science, of course you're going to come up with great errors. So people then want to attack science as its data. But I think the data is really good. So the approach I take is, unless otherwise, unless there's good evidence otherwise, I will accept the data of the moment as the best look that I can get of the nature of existence or of Allah's creation. And I've said this in the past couple of talks, and I want to say it again. I want to probably say it in every talk, because I think this is absolutely critical, and this is why I am giving these talks, not because I want to just tell you, like today, it isn't just that I want to tell you what I think the true nature of our existence is, but because I think the fact that when Allah told us that He has given us two Quran, and that we are to read them in a balance, and if we don't read them in a balance, we won't understand the religion He has given us, and our practice of it will go badly. I think this is one of the keys to why things have gone badly. And we have focused on the physical book, the Quran, given to our beloved Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. We have just ignored the signs of Allah's creation. We just don't look at it. And as I read books on what it really takes to fully be Muslim, it appears that we need to have a whole lot of objective data, and we are to reflect on that data in a way that is very close. We don't really have the word to describe it, but the word contemplation is used. But it isn't contemplation in the sense of like many Eastern religions want to get you to contemplate and become unaware of the physical world around you and contemplate only on the non-physical. But in Islam, the idea of this contemplation is to become fully aware of the actual that is there. This is why I want today to talk about the true nature of reality. So, we start with Allah. Now, Allah is eternal, so Allah had no beginning. Many questions arise, such as the nature of the physical existence or creation. You know, the very word creation is a time-based word. So it was at the time of Al-Ghazali, when he was arguing against particularly Ibn Sina, and wrote a book called The Incoherence of the Philosophers, because he felt Ibn Sina was too influenced by Western philosophy, and particularly the early Greek philosophers. Ibn Sina had said that there had never been a law without creation. Now, we know that Allah is not His attributes. Like you put all of Allah's attributes together, and that is not the Tawheed of Allah. Allah has an essence that is other than His attributes. I don't want to say separate from, but other than. One of His attributes is creation. And we know that Allah exists outside of time. So the question becomes, how does a being who is outside of time start creation? Or when does a being who is outside of time start creation or start creating? One of the attributes is to create. So the question is, what did Allah create first? Does anybody know what Allah created first? See, I think these are areas that we are really not that sure about. I think the first thing that Allah has created is light. So, in the true nature of things, I think we have Allah and attributes, but not separate from each other somehow. And then the question is, and I don't know how important it is that we really know the answer to this, but the question is, was there ever a time when there was Allah without His creation? The reason why this is something very difficult to answer is because the answer requires a concept bound in time. See? Did you see the point that I'm making? If you have an eternal being who is outside of time, how can this being wait until any certain point to start creating? So actually, Al-Ghazali, in arguing against Ibn Sina's belief, because Ibn Sina's belief was that Allah's creation was simultaneous with Him, that there was never Allah without creation, because there was never Allah without the attribute of being creator, and that Allah, being a perfect being, would be immediately, not immediately, see, we don't have words to say these things, that Allah cannot be there having the attribute of being a creator without having created. So, but Ibn Sina was a believer in like an infinite universe, a universe that went on forever. The argument that Al-Ghazali used to prove Ibn Sina wrong was a ayat from the Quran where Allah says that I created the world in time, and I will destroy the world in time. Al-Ghazali, assuming then that this meant that there was a time when there was Allah and no creation, and now there is creation, and in the future there will be a time when there is Allah and no creation again. Which brings me to the point where we get back to Einstein's theories of relativity. Something that I often say is that now that we have a different perspective of existence, before our perspective of existence was that it was essentially a materialist existence. Secular materialism was our point of view. From the point of view of secular materialism, virtually every major question that has ever arisen in human history has been answered on the basis of viewing the universe or the physical creation from the point of view of secular materialism. Then Einstein comes along and proves secular materialism is actually just totally false. Its basis does not exist. So now we have a different view of the world, and I believe it is a view of the world that is not going to suffer a paradigm shift, because all the views of the world, you know, we go to Aristotle and Copernicus and Galileo and Newton, and each one of those made some progression, and some of those progressions would be called paradigm shifts. But we had paradigm shifts because we were looking at a relative world. And we get to Einstein's work, and now he is looking at the absolute rather than the relative. And so I think that we may expect no more changes. We may expect to find out all sorts of new things. But what I don't think we are going to find out is that essentially the perspective or the view we get from the absolute is going to change as the view from the relative has changed. So what I want to say is, including in Islamic interpretation, every major question that has ever been asked needs to be re-asked and re-answered on the basis of the new worldview. So we get to Allah and created light, because I am assuming, and you know, some people want to say that there are really two positions by scholars. One, there is Allah and His creation, and the other one is there is nothing but Allah. Myself, I favor the position there is nothing but Allah, and that everything that we perceive as being Allah and His creation, or Allah and what He created, is only from our point of view, but not from Allah's point of view. From Allah's point of view, there is only Allah. From our point of view, there are various things. So this is what I want to talk about a little bit today as the true nature of reality. And as I pointed out in the previous week, Allah went from created light, which is, I'll call it perfected light. Now, the reason I call it perfected light, or absolute, because Einstein said, as he looked at the physical creation, he found the one thing that was absolute, and it was light. And as I proved last week, I think it was, or the week before, that these actual proofs show us that light does not exist in the physical world. It doesn't have mass, it's not involved in the flow of time, and doesn't occupy volume of space. So we then might, since Allah has created light, we might want to know what are the characteristics of this light that Allah has created. We know that Allah created angels from light, but what we're not entirely sure of is there a separate spirit world of created light of which the angels are part, or is the created light itself and the spirit world essentially made up of the angels, because the angels have all sorts of form. I think the form of angels is essentially unlimited. Now, when Allah created light, and then created angels. It is not only Adam that Allah breathed His Spirit into, but Allah breathed His Spirit into the created light. And Allah breathed His Spirit into the angels. Because light has an existence in an absolute state, in other words, it has the light manifests the four primary attributes of God to be eternal, omniscient, omnipresent, and omnipotent. The breathing in of Allah's Spirit into something that has an absolute nature is very different than the breathing in of the Spirit that has a relative nature. And human beings, of course, have a relative nature, and all matter has a relative nature. It might appear not. A lot of what I am saying, I go from. These are, of course, when I'm talking about things outside the physical existence, many of them I cannot prove, and so I have to just basically go by logic. But logic is a very powerful tool for human beings. So I think that logic says when Allah breathes His Spirit into light in an absolute form, that Allah can breathe His Spirit into that light in an absolute quality. And this is why we find in light the four primary attributes of God. But when Allah breathes His Spirit into a lesser form of existence than light, that exists in a relative form, like matter and human beings, He can only breathe a tiny portion in, because you cannot put absolute in something that is relative, but you can put absolute in something that is absolute. And I make the assumption, the logical assumption from various places, but part of what I'm telling you today is the way I come to know knowledge. I look at the Quran and see where Allah says to the angels, I am creating a Khalifa on earth. And the angels say right away, why create as your Khalifa a being who will cause mischief and shed blood? Now, how do the angels know the future? See, so I assume that the angels know the future because Allah has breathed an absolute quality into them. And that absolute quality is to be eternal. And so in the same way that Allah is eternal, but lesser, I don't know exactly what it means to have a lesser quality of absolute, but by being eternal, it is possible to know past, present, and future simultaneously, because you are outside of time. So in essence, in a misuse of the word, for a being that is eternal, all time is now. Our past, our present, and our future is to an eternal being a now. So the angels knew what the future would be, and this is why they asked that question. So I go from the fact that they asked that question to say that they must have had breathed into them at least one absolute attribute of Allah. Then I would say logically, if Allah breathed in one absolute attribute, maybe He will breathe in other absolute attributes. So we don't know how close this created light is to the actual nature of Allah. And I've looked all over to find out why it is that many scholars, many Islamic scholars say Allah is created light. I have not been able to find why they say Allah is created light. But I do know that many scholars refer to Allah, as uncreated light. many scholars refer to Allah as uncreated light. So, we have Allah here, who then, with his creative attribute, creates light, and breathes into that light absolute characteristics. And these, that the absolute characteristics are in there logically by surah in the Quran, as I pointed out, and they are in there by Einstein's special theory of relativity that shows light has absolute qualities. And the four absolute qualities being the same ones that theologians say are the primary attributes of God. But then Allah separates this spiritual world into two. And now from created, we have Allah, then we have created light, and then from created light we have material existence. And as I pointed out in previous weeks, just to briefly show again, right, we have light, light. So Allah directs this created light to, at a singularity, which is a point with no dimension, to become subatomic particles, which are now material existence. And because Allah has imbued into his created light absolute characteristics that, and we don't know what number of attributes. The scholars say, we say that Allah has 99 attributes, but scholars say that the number of attributes of Allah are infinite. And we just don't know the rest of them. They're outside our range of knowledge. But when Allah directs light to become subatomic particles or to create the material world, this light does not quit being light. These subatomic particles equal slow light. This is light in its absolute sense, which from our point of view, our relative perception, is traveling around 300,000 kilometers per second. These particles all travel less than that. But they are still light. They are light in an altered form. So when Allah directs light, or photons, electromagnetic energy, to become subatomic particles, that some number of his attributes in some portion get put into, as potential, these subatomic particles. And now we are starting to get to what the real nature of existence is about. That Allah creates a material existence of what appears to us to be little tiny bits of stuff. And those little tiny bits of stuff each one of those little bits of stuff has put into it, by light, some of the potential that Allah breathed into the created light. But subatomic particles such as an electron does not have the opportunity to express very fully whatever potential Allah has placed into matter through light. Basically, an electron doesn't do very many things. And so what we see Allah doing then, and the whole universe, and this is like Allah's grand cosmic plan, that there is a I was actually just reading today a scholar who took the position that Allah did not actually create the universe with a purpose. That Allah created the universe only because He has a creative attribute. And because Allah has a creative attribute, He of course creates. So he wanted to say that there is no purpose behind the creation other than Allah manifesting His creative attribute. Personally, I believe that Allah has a very distinct purpose, which I will try and give some hints about today. I don't want to say I know exactly what that purpose is by any means, but I think we have some pretty good hints as to what it is. And one of the fairly direct places is in that same ayat that I was referring to before, where Allah tells the angels that He is creating human beings to be His Khalifah on earth. And then being asked, well, why these creatures who are going to cause all this trouble? And Allah says, because I know what you do not know. And I take that as an interpretation that Allah has a plan. I think that Allah would not say to the angels, because I know what you do not know, if He did not have a plan. If He was merely creating because one of His attributes was the ability to create, I don't think this would necessitate saying to the angels, because I know what you do not know. And it does seem rather unreasonable from the point of view of a being that is created to perfectly obey the will of Allah, like an angel, if they don't know what Allah's plan is. While they may know that our past and our future, this does not mean they know everything that Allah knows. To be eternal allows them to know our past and our future. This does by no means say that they know what Allah knows. So we then want to say, well, what evidence might we have as to what Allah's plan is? Well, what have we seen so far? We have seen so far that Allah created light, and from His created light, where there was no time and no space and no matter, He went from that created light to a material existence. And that material existence starts in a very primitive form. But this very primitive form is actually made of light that is slowed down. And when that light slows down, it imbues or puts into these particles some potential from Allah. Then when we see what that matter is doing, what Allah does, how that Allah directs that matter for the next billions of years, what we see is, I don't want to go over all of this because we did it before, but we go from these subatomic particles that Allah imbued with some of His attributes through light in the beginning, He then went from the subatomic particles into the creation of atoms. Allah put through light, in its absolute sense, into subatomic particles a potential to be expressed. But that potential cannot be expressed in a very simple form of matter. And so the grand cosmic plan is to go through a series of stages of increasing complexity of matter, each of these new levels being able to more and more fully express this potential that was put in. That the whole purpose of the physical creation, it isn't that Allah did all of this before Adam and then decides to create a Khalifah. I don't think this is the case at all. I think all of this, the whole creation of the material existence, is to create a Khalifah for Allah. We'll go later into what I think could be possibilities of the Khalifah. But as you can see, a subatomic particle can express only a tiny bit of this potential that is there. An atom can express some more. A molecule can express some more. Biological life can express some more. And finally we get to Adam. And Adam is able to express sufficient of the attributes that had been breathed into light in its absolute state, that Adam can now be the Khalifah of Allah. And the way we put it, the way it has been put to us, is that Allah had offered to the sun and the moon and the mountains and the rivers or the oceans or something. And scholars have said, essentially Allah had offered to everything the potential to be His Khalifah. But everything said no, or nobody could say yes until Adam. Nobody said yes until Adam. Now, I think it is not the case that Allah had been specifically like going to each of these levels and saying, would you like to be my Khalifah? And I think it is probably not the case that even Adam was asked to be his Khalifah, because before Adam was created, Allah had said that He was going to create His Khalifah on earth. So I think the choice to be Khalifah is made not by the individual themselves, but by the level of complexity of the organization of the material form that allows the Khalifah, the expression of the Khalifah level. Now, just about all of us are familiar with this particular equation. And I don't know whether everyone knows what the terms mean. E stands for energy, and energy is actually what I am referring to as light. M stands for mass, C stands for the speed of light, and squared is speed of light squared. Now, we have taken this as the equivalency of energy and matter. But remember, I was talking about interpretation based on a materialist view of science. I want to say that this is perhaps talking about something else, and that this is actually a formula of the relationship between that this E here actually equals equals light in its absolute state. And the MC squared equals light in its relative state. So we actually have, from Einstein, an equation that is talking about the equivalency of Allah's created light to the matter that Allah creates from His created light. And if that is so, this greatly increases the importance of this equation, to actually have a physical equation that relates the non-material existence to the material existence. It had never been looked at that way because people didn't realize that the E is actually outside of space and time. I mean, I think I've proved sufficiently that it is. I don't feel I need to keep proving that it is. But so now, we now know that this E is actually light outside of space and time. And this is how it is equivalent to light inside space and time. I think this is a thing of really huge significance. I don't know whether it is felt to be of huge significance, but if this is true, this is really massively huge significance. Then we want to go a little more into what is really the true nature of existence, because I say example, now let's start talking about what we see. What is it I am holding in my hand? Okay. So we say this is a whiteboard marker, right? From our perspective, this is a whiteboard marker. But is it really a whiteboard marker? Or is it a grouping of subatomic particles put together in such a way that our sensory apparatus perceive it as a whiteboard marker? Which is what it actually is. So none of the things we see around us are the things we see. Right? We see the things around us on the basis of the way Allah has given us a perceptual mechanism to perceive His material existence, or the MC squared part. Allah seems to want us to come into the material world, actually where soul comes from, I'm not entirely sure. And I think I'm not sure enough to make a hypothesis on where soul comes from. Other than I would assume, as with everything else, soul is created by Allah. Individual souls are created by Allah. The actual mechanism, I'm not really sure about. Although it would appear that everything that exists outside of space and time that is not Allah exists as some form of light in an absolute state. So soul seems to be light in an absolute state. Now, when Allah created the angels, He created them to do what He wanted perfectly without any free will. For some reason or other, He wanted to have another level of existence, who He still wanted that other level of existence, which is us in material form, to carry out His will. But He did not want to make us do it. He did not want to create us so we would perfectly do it. He wanted to create us so we had within us a characteristic that would allow us to choose whether or not to do it. So, Electron has we have here about probability. In case anybody is upstairs and has any access to any more markers, it would be really nice if I could get one that wrote a little more regularly. Probability in the spirit world or beyond space and time, probability is one of two things. It can equal one of two things. Probability can equal 0, or probability can equal +1, meaning equality either does not exist at all, not the tiniest bit, or exists perfectly manifested. When we get into the physical world, probability exists probability exists in the material world on a continuum here. It gets very close to 0 and very close to +1, but is never +1 and is never 0. Now, this is where the issue of free will comes in. With an angel, in anything that Allah would ask or would desire that an angel do, there is a 0 probability that the angel will go against the will of Allah. A probability 1 that the angel will do what Allah wants. In the physical existence, anything that Allah wants is slightly, there is some probability which is less than 0 that it won't be done, and not quite ever probability 1 that it will be done. And we start with the electron, and an electron has a quality called quantum uncertainty, which essentially means that an electron is a relative thing. It is not fixed in time and space. Its qualities are to be, in other words, you cannot say exactly where an electron is and how fast it is going. Because of the nature of physical existence, it's just not, we don't have the theories or the mechanisms to do it. The nature of being a physical thing says that you cannot know both the speed and the position of an electron at the same time. That they are both relative things. And we express this as quantum uncertainty at the level of the electron. Now, I don't know what levels we go to, but I'll use a term here called degrees of freedom. That an electron, as I pointed out, has a very limited range of what it can do. But within that range, it has some degree of uncertainty. So it has not going to absolutely fulfill the will of Allah to the degree an angel will. It is less than certain that it will do what it is supposed to do than an angel. You get to an atom, and an atom has greater degrees of freedom. So, an atom can do a lot more than an electron. A molecule can do a lot more than an atom. Biological life form can do a lot more than a molecule. And a biological life form, as it gets up to its higher stages, like the highest stages of biological life, which is a chimpanzee, can, well, on the continuum, if this is the continuum, this is called a dichotomously variable continuum. Meaning it's a continuum with two opposing sides. And we'll say this is the continuum of free will. That somewhere way down here, we have the electron. These aren't real places, these are just representative places. That all of these forms of matter, from the subatomic particle up to biological life, they are essentially determined in what they are going to do by Allah. Allah tells them what to do, and they do it to quite a good degree. All of them having some degree of free will, and as I mentioned, when a characteristic, when the photons of light become a subatomic particle, it imbues into that light a certain character, into that particle a certain potential to be expressed. So the expression of the potential of free will, which seems to be one of the things that light puts into the subatomic particle, is at a very tiny form. And so as Allah progresses the universe and sends directions through light for the subatomic particles to organize into more and more complex groupings, Allah gets to the point where, when he gets to Adam, Adam has more free will than the deterministic aspect. All of the levels from the subatomic particle to biological life, the deterministic aspect is greater than the free will aspect. When he gets to Adam, Adam has a greater degree of free will than the deterministic aspect, which is why none of these forms could ever accept to be Khalifah of Allah, because they are essentially determined. Although they are not fully determined, because they are relative, not like the angels who have probability 0 or 1. They have some probability, but their probability is less than half until you get to Adam, that they go along with what Allah wants. So you would say Allah is still directing the activity of all of these levels until he gets to Adam. And once he gets to Adam, he says, okay, now I have spent billions of years and I have created this physical existence made of millions of different levels of physical form. I have directed every one of them to get to a certain point. And that certain point is to be the point where I can assign you the role as my Khalifa. And as his Khalifa, Allah is saying to us now, I have breathed my spirit into you. I want you to go ahead and continue to carry out my will in the physical existence. I don't want you to carry out your will, I want you to carry out my will. And I will give you the power to do it. I have breathed into you, or won't give you, I have breathed into you the power to do it. So you have no power of your own. You will be utilizing my power. I will actually make the thing that you decide happen. But it is your responsibility to use your free will, which went through these various stages of progression until it could be expressed more free will than the deterministic aspect. And this is why when we look at the when we look at the personality theory, for animals, we'll forget the perception for now. So for an animal, this is all there is. And so the environment consists of these two things, the physical environment and the social environment. And they are going to determine what the animal will do. And these are directed by Allah. When he creates Adam, he adds this new stage, which is where the free will comes from. And because in that same ayat from the Quran where Allah was telling the angels that he was going to create a Khalifah on earth, right after saying to the angels, I know what you do not know, and then it seems almost like a non sequitur or something that doesn't follow. The next thing Allah says, and then he taught Adam the names of things. But as I pointed out before, this does not mean taking Adam around and saying, you know, this is a magic marker, this is a chair, this is a wall. That what he has done in teaching Adam the names of things is given Adam the ability that no other level of physical existence had And this ability is to be able to use a symbolic language, to think to himself. Therefore, instead of being subject to external environmental causes, this is internal environment. The inner speech. So now, although the human being is still determined, the human being is now determined, mainly if they choose to be, by something that is within themselves and which they have control over, which is their symbolic language. So Allah has created this whole physical existence to achieve higher and higher levels of complexity of material form, until he could get to the point where he could create Adam, who could then make a choice whether or not to continue to follow Allah's will. And I think we probably should take a break now before we go to the next half of the talk. So thank you. I think there are some snacks or whatever in the other room. And I hope this hasn't been too much. I mean, I'm really covering a lot of things quickly here, because the true nature of reality is there is really a lot to it. In the second half, I hope I don't shock anybody with some of the assumptions that I might make from some of this. Start again. By the way, I don't know if anybody noticed, but over here today, we have for the first time a few copies of, in Bahasa Melayu, a color version of the parenting book. If anyone wanted to give somebody not just a really valuable knowledge gift, but a very pretty gift also. It is much prettier than our simple black and white version. It has some additional graphics in it. Very nicely done by Saba Islamic Media. So, I have made the claim that we have such a thing as and we were talking about, is this really a magic marker, or is it a grouping of little bits of energy? Because when I say some of these things, I use the standard language that is used in physics, but then we know that these things are not actually the reality. When I say that when two photons collide, they create a particle, among other things, such as a photon or an electron, they don't actually create a particle at all. There is no such thing as any particles. Particle would be a little bit of matter, a little bit of stuff. There is no little bit of stuff there. In this hydrogen atom, there is, in the center, a little pool of energy moving very fast, maybe .9 the speed of light, with an electron in some sort of shape around it, not an orbit, but traveling probably 0.3 the speed of light. Each of these are still little bits of energy. They are not little bits of stuff. To give an idea, in a hydrogen atom like this, we have the proton in the middle and the electron out here. To give an idea how little bit of, or how empty this is, this proton in the center, equivalent to the electron cloud that where the electron goes, would be somewhat similar to a soccer ball in a soccer stadium. So, I mean, if you imagine what a tiny bit of room a soccer ball takes in a whole soccer stadium, this is about how much empty space there is there. But we see these things as solid, right? And this is the reason we don't walk through walls. We consider walls to be solid, although they are 99.99999% empty stuff. But even this, see, so I say we can look at it like this, like it is a whiteboard marker. Then we can go to another level and say it's not really a whiteboard marker, it is a grouping of protons and electrons. But I want to read something out of this this book here, talking about another level of looking at this. Because to believe this is a whiteboard marker is one level of perception. To believe that it is a grouping of subatomic particles is another level of perception. Both of them essentially provable. Then we go to another level. I'll just read several paragraphs here. What is wrong with our view of reality? The effect of the incorrect view of reality is in every aspect of our lives, our beliefs, and our institutions. The basis of that error is the belief that the universe is a mechanical system made up of separate objects which in turn can be reduced to fundamental building blocks. So here we have a separate object, and we say that if we want to, we can reduce it to fundamental material building blocks, subatomic particles. That all sounds quite reasonable. Each thing in the universe is separate from all things around it. All those separate things are made up of several basic particles, electrons, protons, and neutrons. All the different material objects and elementary particles which make up those objects work according to fundamental laws. Those laws determine everything the universe does. Sure, that sounds reasonable. Wouldn't have been so widely believed if it didn't seem obviously true. What then does quantum physics and relativity tell us that is so different from this view? That the universe is one indivisible dynamic whole, whose parts are inextricably interrelated and can only be understood as fluid patterns of a cosmic process. So now we are saying, not only is the marker not a marker, not only is it not made up of a whole lot of particles grouped together, but what it really is part of one totally combined energy field, a field of energy that is all of material existence. And within this energy field, there are places of greater and lesser density. And where you have a particle is a place of greater density. And where you don't have a particle, it is a place of lesser density. So there are no parts, only the whole. Everything we see as a separate object is actually connected to every other thing. All of those things which appear to us as objects are actually vibrating patterns of energy. The so-called particles, which we believe made up those objects, are not little bits of physical material, but would be better thought of as places within the fabric of existence where the energy fields are more intense. So this is like 3 levels we can look at already. Of course, in Islam, in some religions, I think particularly the Hindu faiths, they would support a view of considering all of this, considering this marker to be an illusion. and try and break free from that illusion. In Islam, we are supposed to accept the perception of reality that we see as the reality that we have to deal with. And Allah has set up the world that way. Just a couple of other things, if I could mention here. These among the qualities that when Allah creates particles of matter through light and puts certain potential in, one of the things that the matter does is it is in motion. Matter has to be in motion to exist in the physical world. The motion of matter in the physical world is actually what at the level of biological and human life we would call being alive. That essentially the whole cosmos is alive. It has, every bit of matter has a quality of life. It has the quality of life within it. The quality of life is the fact that it is in motion. And as it goes through the various stages from subatomic particle to atom to molecule to biological life, that characteristic gets expressed more and more perfectly. Same thing is true with consciousness. You could define consciousness as the ability to perceive and react appropriately to the environment. And the subatomic particle will perceive and react appropriately to the environment, just as an atom will and a molecule will and biological life will to some degree. But then you get to a human being, of course, and then we may have to define differently as to whether or not a human being responds appropriately to the environment. We are supposed to respond appropriately to the environment, but we are given the freedom not to. So I think I may have shown this before, but this is really what seems to be happening